Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Legal Leak, where I leak some information about my experience of working in the legal industry. Solicitor or barrister? This is actually a very interesting question because a lot of people lean towards being a solicitor or a barrister because of their perceived skills. For example, people who are deemed to be really good orators tend to be leaning more towards the barrister route, as well as people who prefer to work by themselves as well. And then people who are solicitors tend to put themselves in that bracket, or aspiring, of course, if they don't feel that they're as great orators, because most people who don't have so much insight about the industry will choose based on whether or not they have really good public speaking skills. In reality, the answer to this question is a lot wider, but I will just give a succinct summary of my thoughts and feelings about solicitor or barrister, because when I first started my journey in the legal profession, I was like, okay, I'll qualify as a solicitor, but like switch to become a barrister because actually I only really want to be a barrister. Anyway, let's get into it. First of all, being a solicitor or barrister are not the only two options. There are so many different ways to qualify as a lawyer in England and Wales. So you can go down, the Silex route, you can become a legal executive. I just think, do some research into how to be a qualified person in law and what it means to be a qualified person. Particularly if you're interested in honestly only one area of law, you don't have to be a solicitor. Some people do become, Silex qualified, for example, and then choose to qualify as a solicitor afterwards. I do think, because obviously we're talking about being a solicitor or being a barrister, they are quite different. And I mean that based honestly in the area of law that either of them would be in. So for example, we'll talk about being a barrister. I'm obviously not a barrister. I've never been a barrister. I'm not a qualified lawyer. I have never been a qualified lawyer yet, but we're getting there. Being a barrister, your experience can really vary depending on what area of law you work in. Same as being a solicitor, to be honest. Working in criminal law means that you will be going to court a lot more regularly than, for example, if you do more like civil areas of law, or if you do, for example, dispute resolution between companies. That is going to have a different kind of experience overall as working as a barrister compared to somebody who works in, crime. So I think area of law is a huge influencing factor that will influence what your experience as a barrister would be like. I actually was very lucky enough to do, luck is for leprechauns and I'm not green. I'm very honoured to have had the opportunity to shadow a barrister. It was like a mini pupillage. It was across 4 days, so not like a super long period of time. Very eye-opening. The barristers, I shadowed 2 barristers, one for 1 day, one for 3 days. One was a trial on theft, which was so interesting. And then the other one was for fraud, which was also really interesting. Both of those experiences taught me a lot. And to be honest, with the second one, that was 3 days, I was able to speak to all of the barristers that were in court that day, on those days, and I had a list of questions and I answered them absolutely every single one. Some people literally met their husbands or wives, who were also barristers at court. I thought it was so wholesome. But anyway, getting back to the question. For the most part, yes, there is, of course, the advocacy part of it, but that's not the only side of being a barrister. I am not well versed in what it means to be a barrister, so you should definitely do more research into that. But it's a lot more, there's a lot more writing and advising than you might think. Most cases settle before, I'm talking like not criminal law cases, they tend to settle outside of court, which means that you don't often go through the court process. Whereas, of course, if you worked in criminal law and you were interested in being a barrister, then you'll be in court a lot more regularly, and probably have a higher amount of cases on your rung, as it were. Potentially, of course, potentially. I would also say, being a barrister, it's a lot less, there's a lot less of a requirement to be a team worker. You are essentially working pretty much by yourself in chambers, which is basically a kind of like it's a building, an office building where other barristers work, and clerks as well. So I do think that it's definitely a different skill. I remember one barrister saying that, you know, sometimes it does get a little bit lonely because you're spending quite a lot of time, you know, working by yourself. And obviously people do talk at chambers about, you know, their thoughts on cases or ideas or something. So there is some communication about a few things, but, you know, not nearly as much as when you're a solicitor. Of course, you will at some point, I'm sure, have to, you know, go to court, help a client, you know, before things get to that stage. So additionally, you are employed by, for the most part, of course not all the time, but you're employed by solicitors. So clients don't come to you directly, they tend to go through solicitors, and the solicitors will instruct a barrister, or counsel is what we call it. And then again, on the flip side, so obviously you kind of want to have a good relationship with solicitors. That has a lot of networking behind it, building relationships. Of course, you know, there are instances where you kind of just need a barrister. You need counsel's advice on something, sometimes very niche, sometimes on a novel area of law, which means the law may not be so well tested or tried in that area. There's not so much case law to support which way a case could go or understand the merits of a case, so how successful it could be. And then on the flip side, obviously being a solicitor, a huge amount of teamwork, obviously a huge amount of paper, a lot more client interaction. And, you know, you can kind of see the case from its very start to its very end. So yeah, I think being a solicitor doesn't necessarily mean that you won't have good communication skills. I can't even express, I'm not qualified, I'm on my way to qualification, but I've done a few presentations in my time. You know, having the skill to be able to communicate is extremely vital in working in law, of course, and I appreciate it's not necessarily in front of a judge in the same way that, you know, a barrister or a solicitor advocate would be doing. So yeah, I do think that, you know, it's nuanced, but, you know, if you want to be a barrister, I would definitely say try and get some experience in that area. You know, contact people, see if you can shadow them for a few days, so you can better understand what it's actually like. Same with, I'll also contact barristers as well. You know, they're really lovely. Or the ones I've encountered are really nice. Same with being a solicitor. I think there's quite a few opportunities for work experience as being a solicitor as well. So yeah, I hope that's given you some insight. I hope I've not spoken about one too much. But yeah, I hope that has been helpful. And again, if you have any questions, please comment them down below. If there's anyone who you think this video could help, please share this video with them. And until then, I will see you in the next video. Bye.